Hello everyone and welcome back to One Nerd to Rule Them All. And in today's video we'll be doing yet another battle breakdown of Middle-earth. Today we are covering the war that came at the close of the Second Age, in a combined effort to bring down Sauron. Although the eventual outcome was successful, the mistakes made would once again bring forth the evil lord. Today we are covering the War of the Last Alliance. We'll be covering it how it's perceived in the books and touch briefly on its depiction in the movies. So without further ado, let's get into the breakdown. Ever since his defeat in the Battle of Gwerthlo, Sauron nursed a special hatred against the Númenóreans and longed to take his revenge. In 3261, Sauron dared to wage war against Númenor, and the last king of Númenor, Ar-Pharazôn, had gathered a massive army to counteract this threat. Perceiving the might and splendour of the Númenóreans, Sauron's servants deserted him, and Sauron was filled with fear and was quickly humbled. He was brought as a hostage to Númenor, and finally succeeded in taking his revenge by playing a vital role in the events that led to its downfall. Yet of all Númenóreans, he hated Elendil most, and his wrath was great that he and his sons had escaped. After the downfall of Númenor in 3319 of the Second Age, the remaining faithful, led by Elendil and his sons Isildur and Anorion, established the realms of exile in Middle-earth. Elendil ruled Arnor in the north, and Isildur and Anorion jointly ruled the southern realm of Gondor. Sauron, however, perished physically by drowning, being caught in the fall of Númenor, which he had cleverly schemed to bring about. Yet nevertheless, even though he truly was drowned, Sauron's spirit endured. He returned to the fortress of Barad-dûr in Mordor, and was able in time to take shape again. However, it should be noted that thereafter Sauron could no longer take on a deceptively fair and greatly pleasing form, as Sauron had done so long before, in order to deceive the elves, and then again much later the Númenóreans too, whilst he was held a willing captive. Perceiving that his enemies of old had escaped the downfall, Sauron's wrath was great, and in 3429 launched an attack upon Isildur's fortress, Minas Ithil. Believing that Sauron had perished in the downfall of Númenor, they were completely taken by surprise. Minas Ithil was taken, and the white tree of Gondor that Isildur had planted there was burned. Nevertheless, Isildur, his wife and his children escaped, saving a seedling of the tree, and sailed down the Anduin, journeyed to Elendil's realm of Arnor. There Elendil and Gil-galad, High King of Noldor, forged the last alliance of elves and men in 3430 to defeat Sauron ultimately. Meanwhile, Anorion held out in Gondor, defending Osgiliath and Minas Arnor. In 3431 of the Second Age, the elves of Lindon, led by Gil-galad and Círdan, marched eastward and were awaited by Elendil at Amon-Sul. The combined host marched towards Imladris, where they joined with Lord Elrond, who was Gil-galad's herald, and acted as his second-in-command in the coming campaign. The united host rested for about 3 years in Imladris, also known as Rivendell, forging weapons and making plans. They crossed the Misty Mountains over many passes and marched down the Anduin, where they were joined by elves from Greenwood the Great, led by King Orifor and his son Thranduil, and the elves of Lorien under King Andir, as well as by the kindred of Durin's folk from Khazad-dûm. At the southern eaves of Erengelen, the host turned southeast and marched through desolate areas that had once been the Entwives' garden. They, and probably the Entwives themselves, had been destroyed by Sauron to deprive the Alliance's forces of supplies. The Alliance entered the vast plains outside Mordor, where Sauron's host awaited them from the northwest. Of the dwarves, few fought either side, but the folk of Durin from Khazad-dûm fought against Sauron. Now we're going to be talking about the Battle of Dagorlad. The Sylvan Elves of Greenwood the Great, led by their king Orifor, and the Loriens, led by King Amdir, were not well equipped with armour and weapons in comparison to the Eldar of the West, and did not want to place themselves under the supreme command of Gil-galad. Orifor and his bravest warriors of the Sylvan Elves charged forward before Gil-galad had given the command, and suffered heavy casualties, including Orifor himself. Amdir and his forces were cut off from the main battle and driven to the northwest into the marshes. where he also fell along with more than half of his troops. The area became known afterwards as the Dead Marshes because of the thousands of bodies buried there. The battle raged for days and nights continuously, but the elves were still mighty in these times, and the Númenóreans were tall and strong and terrible, and none could withstand Egolos and Narsil, Gil-galad's spear and Elendil's sword, which filled the orcs and the wicked men with fear. Slowly elves and Númenóreans whittled down the vast numbers of orcs and pushed them back towards the Black Gate. No account is given how the Alliance managed to break through this mighty fortification though. Now moving on to the Siege of Bador. The forces of the last Alliance had forced their way through the Black Gate and into Mordor itself. Victory seemed close, but no power short of the Valar could breach the Dark Tower by force. Though a great part of Sauron's forces was destroyed, his host was still numerous, and Sauron ordered many a charge. The siege went on year after year, from 3433 to 3441. Isildur's sons, Aratan and Carayon, were detached and sent to Minas Ithil to guard against a breakout of the southwest by his eldest son Elendor, serving by his side till the end. Anorion was killed in 3440 by a projectile thrown from the tower. In the 7th year of the siege, it became so pressing that Sauron himself came forth. His onslaught was terrible, and the siege was almost broken as Sauron and his host advanced to the slopes of Mount Doom. There he was encountered by the captains of the Alliance, Gil-galad and Elendil, and to their side stood Elrond, Círdan and Isildur. Sauron fought with Gil-galad and Elendil, and both were slain. As Elendil fell, his sword was broken beneath him, yet Sauron was thrown down too, and Isildur seized the hilt of his father's sword, and cut off the fingers of which Sauron wore the One Ring. Being bereft of its power, Sauron was no longer able to hold a physical form, and perished. The Alliance pursued the orcs, who were then in disarray, and killed them all. The Barad-dûr was levelled, but its foundations remained behind, since they were built with the power of the One Ring, which was not yet destroyed. The thousands of dead men and elves were taken out of Mordor, and buried in the Dagorlad plain. Over the course of the war, which ended at the siege of Barad-dûr in 3441 of the Second Age, most of the Sylvan army had been lost. Thranduil led the remaining third of his army back home to the Greenwood. While he had captured the One Ring, Isildur refused Elrond and Círdan's entries that he destroy it by casting it into the Crack of Doom, claiming it was a weregild for his father's and brother's death. The result of this was that while Sauron was defeated and cast down, his spirit was not destroyed. He hid in the dark lands east of Mordor, and slowly rebuilt his power. The 9, Nazgûl, also bided their time for the day that he would rise again. While the orc armies of Sauron had been well nigh destroyed in the war, scattered groups of them survived. In the last alliance, the casualties had been heavy. Elendil and Anorion were gone, and Gil-galad, the last high elf of Noldor, was no more. Arnor took grievous losses, and suffered from a decline in population. It never really recovered as a major power, and broke into 3 pieces some centuries later. Gondor suffered less heavily, and became a powerful nation. Isildur, the new High King of Arnor, perished only 2 years later, in the disaster of the Gladden Fields, along with his 3 older sons. They were ambushed by an orc task force operating near the river Anduin. In the course of Isildur's death, the ring was lost in the depths of the Anduin. Much was lost, but Sauron was suppressed for a while. That is until many years later, when Déagol found the ring. The films compressed the Battle of Dagorlad and the siege and the final duel into one, and placed them all at Mount Doom. In a prologue, similar to that of the 1978 film, the main war of the Last Alliance is seen briefly in Lord of the Rings: The Fellowship of the Ring. In the 1978 film, the entire venture of the Last Alliance was combined into a short silhouette play, in which Isildur cut the ring off Sauron's hand in battle, not when Sauron was already conquered. In The Fellowship of the Ring, the main perspective of the entire prologue lies with Elrond. The death of Gil-galad is not mentioned, Anorion is cut completely, and the deaths of Elendil and Sauron are rewritten. After coming forth, Sauron wreaks havoc among the elves and men, and a blow from his mace throws Elendil against the mountainside, killing him. Isildur then tries to take up Narsil, but it breaks as Sauron steps on it. In a desperate strike, Isildur slashes the ring and 4 fingers from Sauron's hand. Sauron's body sends a shockwave over the land and dissolves into nothingness. In the last scene named The Fate of the Ring, Elrond tells Gandalf of the final debate with Isildur inside Mount Doom. Círdan is not present, and Isildur refuses by simply saying no. Very different from how the battle actually took place. This was the breakdown of the War of the Last Alliance. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, then please leave a like on the video and subscribe if you haven't already. Anyway, that'll be it from me. I hope you have a wonderful day and I will see you next time. Bye for now.